Good morning, everybody. If we could settle down so that we can start the next panel so that we don't delay the entire day's proceedings. I'm going to Once again, a very good morning. My name is Beverly Shea. Before we begin this session, I have some wonderful news that I think deserves a great applause. This moment we dedicate to Banyana for beating Italy 3-2. And that is exactly a case in point that we don't recognize our female football players and soccer players like we worship our Bafana. But our Banyana deserves a lot of applause. Thank you very much. Right, over to the session that we have, the panel discussion that we are beginning today. This is really a topic for discussion on collaboration in ensuring an effective gender transformation program. I would like to introduce the presenters and moderators and panelists for this session. Our moderator, Ms. Kumbi Rama. Ms. Rama has 25 years of experience working in the non-governmental organizations and institutions of higher learning. Her main focus is media communication, education, research, and training. In her time at Gender Links from 2003 to 2014, she contributed to growing the organization from 4 to 60 people with offices in 10 countries. Since then, she has been spending time developing monitoring and evaluation systems to support and measure change. Over to our panelists. Ms. Maluleka is a Chief Director in the Department of Women, Youth and People with Disabilities. She is responsible for the coordination and management of the socioeconomic transformation and the implementation of the empowerment program for women, youth and people with disabilities. She is an advocate of gender equality and mainstreaming and supports the monitoring and evaluation of gender programs, including gender-based violence, sanitary dignity, etc. Welcome. Dr. Matoma Kanyaka. Dr. Kanyaka is the Vice President of the South African National AIDS Council. He is a co-founder and executive director of Azili Healthcare, currently serving in various structures of the South African National AIDS Council as a member of the Civil Society Forum Coordination Committee, co-chairperson of the Program Review Committee, National Strategic Plan Reference Group and Men's Sector Deputy Chairperson and co-convener of the National Men's Parliament. Welcome, Doctor. And finally, Ms. Alison Tilley. Ms. Tilley is an attorney and coordinator of the Judges Matter program or project, which is housed in the law facility at UCT. Judges Matter is a project which aims to support a strong, independent judiciary. She is also a part-time member of the Information Regulator, which has the implementation of the Promotion of Access to Information Act and the Protection of Personal Information Act as its mandate. She advises rape crisis on their Rape Survivors Justice Campaign and is part of the Pillar 3 of the NSP, which deals with justice issues. She made her first submission to Parliament in 1997 on the issue of children in jail in front of the Correctional Service Committee. Welcome, Ms. Tilley. And over to you, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I've been thinking, I've been here since yesterday, and one of the things that and I come from a civil society organization, and I'm also from that generation of young people that they call the ungovernable youth. And even at 55, I don't think I've quite outgrown that title. So I still consider myself an ungovernable youth. So what I want to try and push us to do now is to focus on how we move forward. We've heard a lot about what we've done and how we've done it. But here's the truth, friends. Banyana just won and have moved. But they do not earn the same as Bafana. And that is a very important thing to start thinking about. How do we change that? It is very important we change that. It is inherently not fair. And that is what I'd like us to think about as we're doing this session. So the questions, I'm posing 2 questions to each of our panelists, and I would like them to respond. And thereafter, we want to open the floor to discussion. But again, let us look ahead. What are we taking into the strategy, the next strategy, that's going to actually make a difference? That's going to ensure equal pay for all people. So the first question I would like each of you to address yourselves to, from wherever you sit. Obviously, there'll be different responses. And I would like to start with Esther. Sorry, Esther, I'm calling you by your first name. But Esther and I know each other for well over 20 years. A long relationship. Esther thinks we should retire, but we haven't reached our goal yet. So the first question is, what are the key lessons that we can take from the last strategy? What should we not do? What worked? One of the things I've been hearing repeatedly since yesterday morning is that we have not measured adequately. We haven't measured what we have done in a way that helps us understand if it's working or not working. So the whole idea of monitoring, evaluation, indicators, just measuring change and how that has worked. So Esther, first to you, what are the key lessons we can draw from the last strategy that we need to take or not take moving forward?
Good morning.
Morning.
No, afternoon. Is it morning or
Morning.
afternoon?
Morning.
Okay, thank you. And all protocol observed. I think we've made strides. We're not yet where we are supposed to, quite frankly. We have a long journey to still travel. But we also come far. And one of the things that I think we are beginning to make a shift around, it's what Dr. Lehutla said earlier on, and I want to borrow the words that he used. He said, inputs are important, but in the final analysis, they're not what matters. And I'm not quoting him verbatim, but that we need systems and design thinking. And I'll speak from an official in government perspective in terms of the work we do, at least as a Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. I think what I just said is beginning to come alive. I can't speak for all government, but I can speak for our own experience as Department of Women. And we've learned that institutionalization of the work that we do is quite critical. putting systems in place, which we've never used to. It's very critical. And this work has just started. We've also learned that partnerships are very, very critical if you want to go far. Because government doesn't have, with huge responsibility, but the reality is we don't have the necessary capacity that needs to take us where we want to be. Whether you talk capacity in terms of skills around gender mainstreaming, whether you're talking knowledge, at least of people that are supposed to be implementing these programs and policies and legislation. So we are beginning to put those building blocks in place, and we are learning that it's working. But most importantly, we are learning that you can't get where you want to in terms of gender mainstreaming without holding people accountable. And I'm talking leadership, and leadership across the board. As you can see, or you've noticed, the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, it's one of the most important piece of work that we've managed to do so far. And we've agreed with our partners that for us to succeed in implementing that plan is going to take the whole of society, not only government. So we've managed to change the narrative, at least in as far as gender-based violence is concerned. And we are saying it can't only be government and civil society. Private sector needs to come in, and faith-based organizations and traditional structures need to come on board. So it's a whole of society, and it's leadership that's going to matter, that's going to ensure that we get where we want to. Maybe let me pause there.
Sure. Thank you very much. Dr. Khanaka?
Yes, Kubi.
So you tell us, I mean, from where you sit, obviously the SANAC, it's about HIV/AIDS, but also SRHR. So from where you sit, what are the key lessons we should be taking note of as we move into the next strategy?
Yeah, so Kubi, I'll take it from where Esther left off, on the issue of institutionalization. And maybe to be a little bit ungovernable is to say, from a civil society perspective, it's not going to be a negotiable anymore, because in the absence of for us to collaborate better, we cannot speak about that without institutionalization. Now we're going into 20 years of the sectoral parliament framework, and I think it was the fifth democratic parliament that considered that we must shift from an event-based arrangement to be more interconnected and connecting with communities. Now, of course, having started with the women and the youth parliament and then adding several parliaments, we got to a point now where we really need to look at how does the three spheres of government, at national, at provincial, at local level, it's institutionalized. And I'll give an example of the men's sector. We came in last to this framework, where we looked at, and it's something that we'd want to see with all the sectoral parliaments. So we create that framework where we increasingly meet, like once every 2 years, we'll meet at national, and the frameworks for us to meet, annually in provinces, more frequently, twice a year in districts and the local municipalities on a quarterly basis. So that as we self-organize, and do the work in communities, we can then feed into this particular system, and then we can then start speaking about that whole smart indicators of now being, specific and measured and so forth. So the question of institutionalization is one that it's an absolute non-negotiable, and we want to see the next term parliament really taking it forward in terms of our relationship with the legislature in terms of the sectoral parliament frame. The other issue in terms of, I don't know if it's a lesson learned, and maybe you also spoke about being ungovernable. we need to look at semantics. This word gender, it's dog whistling for women. I mean, we all know here when we say gender, deep down in our bone marrow, we mean women. And by implication, it of course leaves the men behind. Now, of course, this is in the context of patriarchy and misogyny. And there was a speaker earlier that spoke about the importance of, women's spaces. And that goes without saying, it's absolutely sacrosanct. We must have women caucuses, we must have women sectors, and all sorts of women's spaces. But when we speak about gender, I think we have to be true to that term so that we don't then reinforce to use it for exclusion. Because if you look at the issue of gender transformation, and this is a lesson that I think we must take forward, I think we cannot, exclude it in terms of achieving that mandate from men. I mean, there's other struggles, with the class struggle, we can close ourselves here at Zimbali and leave Mlazi to be. Even in the racial struggle, we can establish a folk start there and be. But when it comes to the gender issue, just for a human being to exist, it has to be the meeting of these two genders, and just for the humanity to exist. So we are literally not, separable. And yet, we have created an environment where, we are excluding men. And this is also in the context of, reviewing this question of empowerment. Because this idea of us saying there's this empowered group and then there's this disempowered group. Personally, as a man, I feel insulted, and it explains why I'm likely to kill myself. Because there's so many areas of disempowerment that I have. And the idea of being empowered economically, it does not translate to being empowered in terms of health. I mean, you look at the data on health. In my previous life, part of the reason why I walked away from the casualty was that clearly men were unhealthy socially, so this idea that, disempowerment belongs to one group, I think it's quite detrimental. I mean, even as a daughter, I mean, as a son, sorry. I mean, I'm looking at my mother, she's not disempowered. There's no way, there's areas that must be improved economically, positions of power, but there's so many other areas of empowerment. If I look at my father, he's not empowered. He has got so many areas of areas that requires empowerment. So it comes back to this area of gender, so that those lessons learned in taking forward, when you talk about the strategy, we really bring in the gender issue into the man, female, and in terms of gender descriptions around masculinity, femininity, and gender non-conforming people.
Thank you. I think that what you've raised, which I think if we go around the room, there'll be many who will disagree. There'll be others who may agree. But I think it raises a critical point about having these discussions as we move forward. And I think to use gender as a form of exclusion is also slightly extreme. But I do agree with you on one point. We have to stop talking about empowerment, because inherent in the concept is that somebody has power and somebody doesn't. And you need to pass over, you need to give power. And in actual fact, every human being has power. It's real about the realization, about agency, about helping human beings realize their age. So in my work and my NGO, I've pushed strongly that we don't talk about empowerment, we talk about power. And Esther will know when we were doing the NSP, it was a big discussion. So the fifth pillar is not economic empowerment, it's economic power. Very different interpretation of how we use the word and what we mean by it. Because you're absolutely right. Your mother does have power. It's the sites within which she can realize that power. So, Ms. Tilly, From a legislative point of view, from a law point of view, what are the lessons that we need to take forward so we have a better plan in the next period?
Well, I would say the lesson that I take away is that if you have a plan that has clear outputs and has everybody pulling together towards a common goal, I think that's where you see the biggest wins. And I mean, I would refer particularly to judges and members of the JSC in the audience who I'd like to acknowledge. But if you look at progress there, I mean, in 1994, we had 2 women judges, and now we have 114 women judges, and 44% of the judiciary are women. And if you look at the magistracy, 51% of magistrates are women. So, you know, it's something where a particular body or 2, if you look at the Magistrates Commission as well, we're given a very clear mandate around transformation. And it has taken a long time. I won't deny that, but it's been very, I would say, successful. We need more than 254 judges, I have to tell you. So they're, with any luck, we'll expand that number and look at bringing more women in. The vehicle that gives me most hope at the moment is the NSP. And I sit in Pillar 3 of the NSP, which deals with justice issues. And if I look at the Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you, Chair.
National Strategic Plan.
The National Strategic
on
Plan
gender-based violence and
on
femicide.
gender-based violence and femicide. And I'm particularly referring to the summit resolutions in the last summit, which was in November of 2022. So just to drill down into that. And if you look at that, and if you look at the role of Parliament in that specific pillar, it is very clear. I think there's not a lot of room for wiggling. Or not much wiggle room. I mean, we're looking at the amendment of various frameworks. We're looking at statutory recognition for Thuthuzela care centres. I mean, that's a bill. Somebody needs to develop a bill and has to go to Parliament. That's you guys. So I think that's one of the things we need to do. If you look at the finalisation of the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, I mean, I think that's nearly through. But a very good example of where Parliament had a job, and they did a job, and now we're nearly there. The Criminal Procedure Act needs an overhaul. That's something that Pillar 3 is supposed to be on top of. Again, that's very much in Parliament's sphere. Finalising the Traditional Courts Bill, very much parliamentary work. The Older Persons Act, the Victim Support Services Act, costing the GBV amendments legislation. I mean, these are all very practical things that are needed in terms of a program which is agreed. I mean, it's agreed by civil society, executive, Parliament, everybody's theoretically on board. There are 6-month and 2-year timelines for all of these things. And I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel on a lot of this stuff. It's not rocket science, although it is quite hard. But we have the drafters, we have Parliament, we have the systems, and it's really just a question of putting our heads down and getting on with it. So I think those would be the key issues for me, and of those, the most important one for me is creating a regulatory framework for the Thuthuzela care centres, which would mean that women across the country get equal access to levels of post-rehab care. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a small town or a big city, that you can expect, an agreed set of services wherever you go. And I think that's the kind of detail that we're at in terms of making sure that Parliament fulfills its role and has oversight. all of these things. I mean, we should be being called to account in committees and committees sitting together. I mean, health, justice, DSD, the multi-party women's caucus. I mean, these are committees who could well sit together and say, okay, out of this spread of things we've committed to, how are we doing? And hold hearings on it. I mean, I think that's a really important oversight role. So the legislative role of Parliament is key, and the oversight role of Parliament is key. And I think with those things, with these very specific tasks and outcomes, it seems to me that that's where we're most successful and get most traction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. And I think you've taken us to where we want to go. And very important, we're not talking about inputs or outputs. You've used the word outcomes. So what is it that we need to take forward, Esther, in order for us to reach the outcomes? And the outcomes are set out in our Constitution to reach those outcomes in this next strategy. What are the key things? Of course, the thing that has come up repeatedly, regardless of session and what we were trying to do, the thing that has come up is gender-based violence. And I think a very serious look at how the National Strategic Plan on GBV and femicide is actually implemented in an effective way. And I think you've started us on that discussion. But there are other areas. Land has come up repeatedly. We had a discussion yesterday about numbers, representation, and how we are dependent on certain parties in order to reach the quotas we need. But I think beyond the quotas, like we have so many more women judges, but has it, for example, resulted in the conviction rates for rape cases going up? You know, so what does it mean when you have more women? What should it mean? Esther, so what are the key things we need to take forward in the next 5 years so we see outcomes?
Thanks once more, Kubi, for the question. I made reference earlier on to the NSP. We're learning lessons there. I'll come back to it. But one of the things that I would like Parliament in their role, oversight role, to really focus attention to is the gender responsive planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation. You'll have noted that we are the pioneers of gender responsive budgeting. But in the last few years, we've actually expanded it to look at the whole planning cycle of government. Because we believe that you can't just start at budgeting level, like it was said earlier on. That's an input, but we would like to start at planning level, where we ensure that indicators, gender indicators, are integrated in the planning of government. That's the institutionalization that I spoke to, I made reference to, where we ensure that the medium-term strategic framework, to start with, has got those indicators that we have agreed upon. You have that in the MTEF, which is the medium-term expenditure framework, thank you. And we then drill down to annual performance plans of departments. That's integrating into government system, because the problem currently with gender programs in government is they run parallel to everything else. There'll be a gender focal point, and I was once one of those for 9 years. And I was very frustrated in the Department of Health, because even when we had the policy on gender mainstreaming, we're the second department after Department of Justice. And I'm talking in 2000. That's a long time ago. That policy, nobody took it seriously. Nobody paid attention to it. It was running parallel the annual performance plan of the department. And there are many policies now of government, I mean, of gender mainstreaming. So I would really like Parliament moving forward to really pay attention to this framework, because for us, that's really the key that's going to unlock, you know, for us to start seeing impact. Let me give you a practical example. If a department goes to planning, which we often do around June, July to up to October, November, and these plans come to Parliament, and you interrogate them, and you realize that actually they don't have gender indicators, you really do not pass. You take it back, it doesn't go through the vote so that it can be corrected. I think we can learn lessons from countries like Uganda, etc., because this is what they're doing. And that's why I say that framework is so critical for us to start seeing impact. The second part is, it's one thing to have indicators, gender mainstreaming indicators in plans, but you need to into practice. Apart from resourcing, it means you need to monitor, hold people accountable. So there are still a lot of things we need to put in place. For instance, we don't have an accountability framework in government that should be holding each other accountable. Oftentimes it's malicious compliance because you want to tick a box to say you have done 1, 2, 3. But we need to move from those numbers that we've been talking about to start implementing evidence informed. I don't want to use the word evidence-based because there's a lot of interpretation, but we need evidence-informed programs. In other words, programs that we know, and there are a lot of them, that we know work, and roll out those programs. And in many cases, we don't have those in, and we are beginning again. Kubi, as you say, the conversation has started. We are starting to hold departments, at least through the NSP, it's helping us to say, we have programs, we know that they work. Why don't we roll them out so that we can start seeing impact? So in a nutshell, and that's what is going to move us from numbers, so that we start focusing on technical issues, on things that matter, on program. And once we do that, we'll be able to measure, because it will be based on a plan, on indicators that are tracked on a regular basis. As you well know, we track the NSP implementation on a monthly basis. And we are able to engage with departments when we realize that they're actually not focusing on the indicators that are allocated to them, that are aligned to the mandate. And we say, no, you're not working, you're not sticking to the NSP. You've got a plan, you need to focus on the plan and stick to it so that we can measure. So it's trickling down slowly. It's slow, but I think we are getting there. We just need to accelerate. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Sanek, one of the things I said to you earlier, and we talk about our HIV infection figures going down, our rates going down, and we congratulate ourselves. But what we don't do is drill down. That is not entirely accurate. There is one group of people where HIV figures are actually infection rates are going up, and that is young women. And it's not just South Africa, it's the whole of the SADC region. If you start to look, Lesotho, Eswatini, figures for young women are actually going up. And I think what I'm wanting to say now, from your perspective, SRHR, HIV, what are the things we should be focusing on in our new strategy?
So it's exactly what we're talking about here, because I think for a long time, and I mean, having worked in the HIV space, it was a battle to bring the social and structural drivers agenda to the table. Our response was largely biomedical in its response, and we neglected, the community role, which automatically speaks to the, gender transformation agenda. So, we really need to invest in community engagement. So, when you talk about issues of sexual reproductive health, you need to talk about comprehensive sexuality education, meaning that you need to actually start as young as possible in terms of how do we educate, and empower or power men and boys. I mean boys and girls. So and we need to start it at that level, because even when you talk about because you could argue that it's a form of sexual violence. And so when we talk about transforming societies, we need to deal with, and we talk about a lot of outcomes, M&E, but we need to really deep dive into the question of values and challenge ourselves to say, what indicator are you going to put for values? Because what get measures get funded, essentially before it even gets done. Money is allocated to percentage, to rates, or to numbers. And yet we are not challenging ourselves to even dig much deeper, because it is those values that then would build into beliefs, and those beliefs entrench themselves in attitudes. Okay. So by the time they embed themselves into norms of society, we begin to see those problematic languages, those gender stereotypes, objectification being embedded in society. And then society begins now to act from that base of degrading women, where we begin to even harass and verbally abuse, and it builds. So we fail as a society to deal with the more innocuous issues. And so to raise that question, until we get to that point where we invest in the preventative measures. And unfortunately, even from a political point of view, it's not incentivizing. This is not the kind of stuff that will get you votes. No one is going to vote for you because you had a dialogue. People are going to vote for you because you built a Tutizela center. So and so these are they require a race level of consciousness. They are not popular engagements. There won't be cameras for these kind of value-based programs. They really take the hard work of working with people through transformation and behavioral change. So we really require, and this is civil society, it's business, it's government, where we do raise our level of consciousness to dig down and deal with the preventative agenda and find a way to resource it. Sure. But it means we also need to find a way to bring it into the M&E framework.
I don't know if you want to add, Mr. Lee, you told us quite a lot. Are you good?
I just wanted to echo the idea around the annual performance plans, because I think that's critical. And those plans are presented to Parliament, which is the perfect opportunity to challenge them. I am delighted to hear that building a TCC gets you votes. I hope everybody was paying attention to that. There are only 62 TCCs across the country. So when we're talking about access to post-rape care, I think we have to bear in mind that that's actually what we're talking about. And if you look on a map, which is a thing you can do, if you go to the Rape Crisis website, they're just these huge distances between these little blue dots on the map. So I think, if that APP can address that specific issue, then I think we're winning, right? Then I think we're making progress.
Thank you. So I think I'm about to hand over to Madam Deputy Speaker again. She'll be pleased, because I said we'll try and keep time. But just something to keep in mind as we go into questions. We are not seeing gender-based violence reduction. And it's not because we have the National Strategic Plan. We've done many things over the years. I think there is one part of that strategy that we probably need to push forward in a different way, and that is prevention. I have a sense over the years that we have deprioritized prevention as a key strategy to reduce gender-based violence. In research we've done as Gender Links, the most important driver of gender-based violence is not, as you would imagine, unemployment, alcoholism, etc. It's actually childhood experience or witnessing of violence. That is the key driver. And I think when we talk about prevention, we have to start talking about what you were talking about, attitudes, beliefs, but very early on. early childhood, or else we're addressing the wrong problem. I hand back over to you, Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker, and
Very much, Ms. Rahman. Thank you to the panelists. I will now open for questions. I'm going to follow from my predecessor on the strictness, and I'm going to start on this side because you started on that side. 1 minute for a question. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My name is Mohale Moloi from Moral Regeneration. Madam Chair, I'm very much concerned, if I have to say, that as a young person gathered here, or as a young person who is part of the sitting today, from yesterday, is that there is so much of women empowerment. Why I say I'm very much concerned, it's because I work with a program called Boys to Men. And in the Boys to Men program, young boys are already raising the questions of saying that the justice system is already neglecting us men. How do we grow up and become better men if you are already neglected? You know, how do we grow up and become a different society if you are already neglected at a young age? So I am very much concerned on how do we then go back to the communities and speak of gender equality when everything is basically on women, this, women. I'm not saying they shouldn't be. They are equally deserve to be given the specific attention. But what about young boys who are growing, who are innocent, who are not the perpetrators of the challenges we are trying to tackle today? What about them in young age as well? And just to close it off, if a young woman, an example is of a young, the issue that happened last year where a young man was accused, falsely accused, to have raped a young girl. And that boy committed suicide because he was scared of what the community is going to perceive him to be. Why? Because if a man does it, everybody speaks of it. But if it's done to a man, a man is very strong. Thank you.
Thank you very much for keeping to time. Yes, ma'am, I see you over there, and you can be third. So this lady over here.
A total misconception.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I have just two things I would like the legislature sector to take it forward. I think for me, the transformation of how courts currently deals with gender-based violence and femicide issues really need to be looked at. We have, as we all know, South Africa have big issues around DNA and the delays that come when it comes to rape cases and the results. We recently had a court that had 92% of cases of rape that were withdrawn based on DNA results that came back negative. But they came back negative because they've been gone for 2 years or 3 years, and the specimen got ruined. Only 2% was positive, and those cases could go through to court. So our biggest issue on the ground is the fact that once there is an element of DNA, while we know as a country we are not doing well, the evidence in court weighs heavily on DNA. Even if there's doctor's report that proves that there was penetration, even if there's a child statement that says who did it, even if there's a social worker's report that says this has been checked and this has happened, that case gets withdrawn from court. So that is a biggest concern. And I would like the legislative sector to really review the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act to at least include a period as to when DNA results needs to come back, because there is no people that are being held accountable. If this result goes for 3 years or 5 years, nobody is held accountable, and only the survivors of gender-based violence suffers at the end. My last question, again, is directed to the legislature sector as a whole, is the whole issue of bail condition for the perpetrators of gender-based violence and femicide. There is a big outcry at the community level. Bail conditions, even if they are there, once they've been breached, the woman or the survivor of gender-based violence needs to go back, open another case that is going to be investigated by a different investigating officer, that is going to go through a different prosecutor in court. And And now we have two separate cases running. We had a case of a child that was raped, a 15-year-old. The perpetrator got released on bail, went and shot her 9 times, and she went into coma for 2 weeks. When he was arrested for the second case, he was almost released again on bail because the prosecutor that is dealing with the attempted murder case is completely separated from the one that is dealing with the rape case. Can we also, yes, can we ask lastly that at least the bail conditions for perpetrators of gender-based violence and femicide, they have built-in warrant of arrest so that they can be arrested immediately. Thank you
very much. That lady over there.
That's an interesting one.
Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Bosisi Wechwete. I'm a member of Parliament, National Assembly.
I can't.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Bosisi Wechwete. I'm a member of Parliament, National Assembly. Madam Chair, I've been listening to the speakers since yesterday and today, commenting on gender issues. I'm standing here, I would like to make a proposal on issues that were raised the previous days, especially on e-legislation. The first one, there is, you know, when a woman gets raped, it's termed as a rape. But when a boy child gets raped, it's called sexual molestation. There's a minimum sentence there. I would like to propose that we amend that piece of legislation and seek to be inclusive and say, if there is any sexual assault of all human beings, that amounts to rape. The second legislation, Chair, that I would like to propose, especially to my fellow colleagues, is to go back to Parliament and prioritize certain bills, especially those that talks about land. There is a communal land bill that has been processed and it just needs to be signed into law. Can we prioritize that bill amongst other bills? And also acknowledge the bill that talks to and address the issues of rural women. We need to also acknowledge and talk about some of our milestones. When we talk about the Customary Marriage Act that was passed in 2020 May, it's one of the bills that really addresses the plight of women in rural areas where they will be married customary, traditionally, and then the husband goes to work in mines and they are left with nothing. Lastly, Chair, we are here to collaborate the relations with stakeholders on gender issues. There's SANEC, that is already part of our stakeholder is National Parliament. We need to strengthen those relationships so that we address the issues that was raised by the moral regeneration. They are under budgeted.
Thank you. If you can finish.
We need to strengthen them so that they can deal and address the issue of a boy child, because I know there's a men's sector under SANAC that needs to be strengthened so that they can focus on these issues that we talk, because we don't rape ourselves.
Thank you very
much. We don't
much.
beat ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions here? Yes, ma'am. Over to you. Lady in yellow.
Sorry.
Namaste. Igama usazwa kanjani. So I have two things, maybe to just put a question to the legislature of saying they need to really look at is looking at education. Our education systems is failing us. Maybe the reason of high gender-based violence and high infection of young people with HIV and AIDS is through education. If we can then legislate and look over schools of saying, let's talk about these things, many of these challenges will change. Even coming towards talking around sexual orientation, gender identity, it's part of the curriculum, but it's not being done. If we can then look at it and tap on it, that will change so many things. Then also providing psychosocial support towards our communities. We do not have, as much as we have social workers allocated to every ward, are not there really looking at the issues. Every day we look at gender-based cases, we look at being, because a child cannot unsee what they've seen. So providing psychosocial supports in ward levels whereby a person can then come and debrief, because even in the news, our news these days, you can see someone being shot dead. As a 7-year-old, that's the form of violence that you are being prone to see. So everything goes back to saying provide psychosocial support and provide education towards our community.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Honorable Kama.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. My name is Mr. Western Cape. I just want to make one addition, and I think before that, say that as I continue to go to different summits around the question of gender, I get a sense of how it's becoming difficult for a man to raise his voice in that discussion. But when we start the discussion, we say we must not leave men behind. It's something that we will need to talk about. And when you raised it, you are not disregarding what has been a system of oppression against women and the need to and prioritize their struggles. You are not doing that. Because as I'm sitting here in the Western Cape, participated a lot in community safety space. And many people who are there, they are young boys. If they are not at school, if they are not empowered in any way, and society saying to them, if you are a man and you do not work, you are a failure. They then go and be violent. They go to crime, gangs. So really, if we want to resolve this question, COVID-19 period, gender-based violence cases, because people were locked together in their homes, there was no work. There were many angry men in that household because society says you are a man and you must provide. And you are not going to end at empowering the woman and think that you would have resolved the gender struggles. Because patriarchy has as well affected us as men. We were privileged because of patriarchy. But reality now is that as young boys, it has created a particular understanding in society that you as a man, you must go out and work. If you do not, you are a failure. And surely if we discuss gender, we must talk about that.
Thank you.
We must not leave men behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Behind you, sir.
Program Director, my previous speaker concluded that the summit is saying that we should take away the wrong notion of when we talk of gender to consider one gender. So I am putting a proposal that this summit must recommend that all males must get paternity leave, just like the maternity leave going to be received by them.
They have, but they have, don't they?
They get some.
Order.
They do get some.
The second one, I want to,
Order.
the second one, the one of the panelists is talking about holding accountable. Holding accountable is correct, that we need to go that route. But you must understand that last year, one of my family friends declared a marriage which was a same-sex marriage. The room was filled with the professionals, academics, social people, everyone. But everybody was shocked. They could not bear that their son is going to get married to the same sex. So I'm saying that we can speak about all the positions and all that which I talked earlier, but it's important that the society must go. Early 80s, early 90s, late 80s, we have seen HIV when people were feared to touch other person. That was a stigma. That stigma must be treated because we must, if we are talking LG, all that, if we are serious, we need to respect them. We need to say that we need to hug them the same way I hug a woman. Thank you.
And before I hand over, if any of the members, if any of the members would like to see a copy of the Western Cape, we have paternity leave for males. Over to you.
The law provides for it. The law provides for
That's
it.
unacceptable, you know? And
We do.
I forgot.
Madam Deputy
Over to you.
Speaker.
I can't hear you.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. My name is Olwethu Zuma. I come from a civil organization. I think the first thing that I'd like to raise is that I have a concern dating back from yesterday, even today, and in previous programs that are parliamentary, where I made the observation that there is a tendency, and this is in response to something one of the panelists had said, there's a tendency to and what I'm responding to particularly is that we're not in need of power. We all have power. So nobody has power to give to somebody else. And the impression that it gives when you have panelists who are given perhaps 15 minutes to speak and can reiterate and have a back and forth, perhaps speak 4 times before eventually going back to the audience, the risk you run is that one, you create the impression that there's a tap and bucket system where the panelists have all the information to pass on to participants. And then you restrict time to a minute. I think there was a speaker that side who was saying something very critical and was being rushed for time. And I will literally ask her outside because I couldn't get the gist. So the impression being created is that panelists have things to teach people who are in attendance and nothing to learn from them. So I sincerely believe to be done if we're going to make any change is to listen particularly to people who are not necessarily parliamentarians, your civil organizations, because they will be the ones who are going to actually give the information of what's happening on the ground, where people live, where the challenges are, and how effective the programs that are coming from legislature or from parliament are in real life. So a lot of the other things I would have wished to say have been touched on by latter speakers. I just have this growing concern, and that I think that there needs to be a strong following up on policies, because I do believe that there's a policy that speaks to teachers, educators having to report when a child has been impregnated by, when a minor has been impregnated by an adult. But the reality of the matter is that that doesn't happen. It's not followed up. There are no repercussions for nobody reporting it. The police know, the teachers know, your local councils will know, and there is nothing that's being done about that. It's a beautiful policy, and it would keep young children safe if it were implemented, but it's not implemented, and we don't know what the issue is with that. So I'm just trying to say that the policies we make really mean nothing if nobody carries the burden when they are not seen through, and they don't really change our lives in effect. It's just beautiful on paper.
Thank you very much. I'm taking one more question over here, and then I'm going to hand over to the panel. Please, if I can ask, because we have been asked to be over time, unless we extend it for another 15 minutes, we only have till 12:30. Just, ma'am, you've got someone here. I know there's a lot of people who would like to interact, so we will have to interact outside in the tea break. Over to you.
Ndolibua. Dzina langa ndifichiri Maraga, ndiva Limpopo. Ma'am, I would like to make some submissions here. Maybe before I can make submissions, I want to let you know that in the next session, when you facilitate, when you go for pointing people who will be representing or asking questions, you must also consider this side. It's like you are teaching that other class of which we are not happy of that. Thank you very much. Let me pose my question. My concern is for a man to use a condom is a choice, but for a woman to use a sanitary towel, it's not a choice. But when you go around, you will find that the condoms are all over. I never came across a sanitary towel which is free. So how do we justify that if we are saying indeed this is a gender equality? We are saying the legislatures must look into it that the women must get free sanitary towels. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much. I'm going to provide the relevant questions to the relevant panelists. I'll start with you, Ms. Tilly. So there were a fair number of questions around courts, DNA testing, bail conditions. So maybe you could, and of course, prioritizing bills that relate to land, rural woman, rape, definition of rape, and milestones. So.
Thank you. And I think I'd particularly like to address them because I think that's certainly come through, that the men are feeling a little attacked, perhaps. Just to say to you, there are in the region of 45,000 rapes reported every year. Those are by far most people who report rape are women. We think it's somewhere between 1 in 9 or 1 in 12. The research differs of women who are actually reporting. I don't know what number you think are convicted. I mean, how many men do you think are convicted a year? Well, it's 2,500. That's it. And we're in a situation where if you look at those numbers and you look at not just women, but women who are affected by rape and domestic violence and the children that are in their households, we get to 28 million a year. And what that means is that women are afraid to walk down streets at night. They limit their activities. You will remember the mother of Uyinene who was raped and killed in Cape Town, where she said, I told her everywhere not to go, but I didn't know the post office was a dangerous place. So I think you have to remember that the women in this room are not, we're not making it up, right? We are the subject of a scourge where women are attacked because they are women. And I think that's a reality that we really have to engage with. Looking at fake reports of rape, I mean, it's true, there are 1 or 2% of reports that are fake, but as I say, out of 45,000, 1%, what is that, 450? My maths is not that good. I think we have to understand we are up against a scourge in our society, and the only way we can possibly deal with it is to come at it at all angles, right? Legislation is just one tool in our toolbox. We are going to have to engage with boys. We are going to have to deal with education. We are going to have to go to every space in our society. But I'm talking to a group of legislators. So forgive me for harping on about legislation, but that's the thing you guys can do, and do it reasonably quickly. I mean, bills take a while, but 2 or 3 years you can get a bill passed. And I think that's really what I would is, yes, we need to bring everybody along with us, but we are scared to go out of our front doors at night. That's the reality that we're living in, right? And I think we need to understand that as the background for these conversations.
And then perhaps to you, Doc, around the issue of men and boys and the role, and just education of men and boys and their role.
I think Tilly just emphasize, given the numbers, the importance of bringing men and boys to the table. And yes, we might, from a legislative point of view, leading to the judiciary, we might come in the picture of the criminal justice system that explains why 97% of prisoners are males. But it goes back to the issue of engaging men and boys in terms of the prevention, the kind of, without going back to what I mentioned earlier, of the value systems, the norms, social norms in society. So it's critical that we bring deliberately men to the gender discussion so that we prevent. We can't keep on throwing these numbers, 8 women are killed every day, and then just at some point we just need to engage with the potential and the existing perpetrators, so that we prevent. We really invest in the prevention agenda. And I think, although it's a difficult one, I think one of the processes is for us to almost like separate between what I would call the men's movement, which is consciously organized men for the purpose of gender transformation and dealing with men's issues, which speaks about being on this platform, and separating that completely from the movement of men, which then speaks to a 200,000-year-old existence, which 12,000 years ago gave birth to patriarchy, when we began to domesticate plants and animals, and we could really live in big societies, because that's when we saw chiefdoms and kingdoms, and now we have states that are all just being led by men and the various institutions. And so when the men in this house, chairperson, when you wake up in the morning, Mr. Masondo, you don't wake up and say, today I'm going to occupy a seat to oppress women. And you find yourself being the chairperson of NCOP. You didn't sit there and have a strategic plan to say, I'm gonna make sure that I'm at the top. Yeah. You were delivered there by patriarchy, from the whole blue and pink, as we raise children. And you just found yourself occupying the seat of, and this is a discussion for all of us.
Yes.
So that we don't, so the issue of men and women doesn't have to be a battle, because we can collectively fight the system of patriarchy, and unite against that battle, and then create space for men to now deal with issues that are peculiar for them, so that we also raise the boy children. Yeah. And just from the legislature point of view, the sectoral parliaments are that framework that will connect us with you as communities. And we're really calling out to say, let us strengthen those programs. Let's see all the provinces institutionalizing their sectoral parliaments, particularly the children's parliament, the youth parliament, and of course the women as the men's parliament. Let's see councils also taking that role, districts and local municipalities. And then we are self-organizing in communities. We will then join you, but convene us in those platforms.
Okay, thank you. Esther, last issues to you around accountability. I think you have said something about that, but it's accountability and strengthening stakeholder relationships. Your comments on that?
My comments would be, and I just want to allow me quickly say, I hear a debate and conversation about gender and its complexities and us bringing in men. What I'm not hearing is us really contextualizing, apart from patriarchy, the history that we come from. And the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence has been very deliberate. You spoke about Pillar 2. But if you go back to that pillar, you will realize that we factor in the whole idea of social cohesion, which goes beyond just prevention. And then you go to Pillar 4, you will notice that we're going beyond just providing support and counseling to victims and survivors of gender-based violence. We're talking about healing. And I know that the legislature may not legislate social cohesion and healing, but you have a constituency function. And I was wondering whether it's possible for the legislature to begin to consider having programs on healing and social cohesion, so that, and there's various ways that can be done through the arts, through whatever, but it's something that I would really like, as you do the constituency work, to begin to think about and how we can roll that out, working with everyone else, civil society, etc. And that's one of the partners that I think we can come in very strongly about, because it's going to take all of us. What you're talking about besides patriarchy, I think we are wounded as South Africans. We have collective trauma, and it is not only collective trauma from the history of apartheid. We had a few pandemics, starting with HIV and AIDS, now COVID. And all these have traumatized, they continue to traumatize and re-traumatize us. And we've not even begun to think about what is it that we're going to do to heal ourselves of this pain. So coming back to your issue, I think there are a number of things that we can do, and we've learned from work on gender-based violence, that we need to begin by looking for common ground. Because for a long time, the way we engage with each other as government, and when I say government, including the legislature and civil society, it has been very antagonistic. But that is beginning to shift. And what helped us with the National Strategic Plan is it was difficult at the beginning, but we focused on why we were there and find common ground, because all of us wanted the same thing, is end gender-based violence. I think that is what is important. And therefore, apologies should not matter. What should matter is the evidence before us and the sharp focus on what brings us together. And that's very, very important. And it's important also that what we have learned, that you need to engage from the beginning. Even when you make laws as legislation, and I know you do a lot of constituency work, you consult, etc. But I find that civil society organizations, they open up when you involve them from the beginning, not at the end when you are done and you have made a decision. Should also, as officials, adopt soft advocacy. I mean, civil society to adopt a soft advocacy approach with an emphasis on regular dialogue. And by soft advocacy, doesn't mean they should not criticize a government. That's their role, and take us to account where it matters. But it means you do not come with an antagonistic attitude. You come there because you want to resolve a problem and we want to work together. And I think we need to take stock of successes and disappointments and practice adaptive learning together. And could be that would really be my plea. That these are the things that we've learned ourselves. It's not theory, and we think that it's working, but we need to strengthen it. And it doesn't mean we will not have differences. Sometimes it will be very, and it's really taking into account our roles. As government, we need to govern. As civil society, you need to bring the needs of people to the fore and help us build on whatever successes that we've had so far.
Can
Thank
I
you.
just round it up? So I want to leave you with three things before we move to lunch. One, it is not a competition of who's suffering more, men or women, or who is lacking power more. And it's very important that when we enter these discussions, that we keep that in mind. Ultimately, it's about human beings. Two, I'm putting a challenge to all of you because, you know, I do come from that generation. I accept nothing that is going to hurt, that is unfair. Stop quoting patriarchy like it is this massive thing that has massive power over us. We fought apartheid and we won it. And we did that because it was intrinsically unfair. It was an ideology that was not acceptable. Patriarchy needs to be rejected in exactly the same way. Do not use it as a way to justify bad behavior and inequality. And the last thing, fighting gender equality, like any form of inequality, is not my problem. It's not your problem. It is our problem. Because it is a basic human right. It is in our Constitution and Bill of Rights that we are equal. If Banyana earns less than Bafana, and they do better, that is not equal. That is what we need to fight as a group, not as women and not as men, but all together.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rama, and to you and the panelists. Please be reminded that all delegates can send their comments and questions to the LSS at parliament.gov.za. If our technical team could just flight that on the screen for you to be able to extend your questions. Can I ask the speaker, Speaker Sifuba from Free State Provincial Legislature, Ms. Mamwele, Chair of Chair Committees and Chair of Chairs KZN, please to come forward to do the gifts.
Get a present. I hope it's a book.
Thanks so much. Thank you. No, I'm good. Yes, thanks so much. Photo. Thanks.
We are now adjourning for lunch for an hour. Thank you very much.